been given the duty, the privilege to talk to you about the topic, which is Latin America. I've put up on the board the resolution. The resolution is voted on by all of the states and debate organizations, and it is fairly simple. The United States federal government should substantially increase its economic engagement toward Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela. I am going to talk about each sort of the parts of that, break it down. If you have any questions, raise your hand. I'll call you at the end of sections as opposed to at the beginning, so I try to do that. In about an hour from now, I'm going to give you a break, and we're going to come back, and I'll just pick up where I left off, and hopefully at the end of this 2-hour section, you can answer some basic knowledge about Latin America, as well as how these countries apply to the debate topic. So, whoops. First question. Why did we choose this particular topic? Well, I mean, in short, it's timely. In actuality, though, we just haven't debated Latin America in a very, very, very long time. Latin America was last debated on resolutions in 1987, 88, and it has not been debated since. The topic was written by a guy named Darren Mayer. You can write that down. Darren Mayer is the author of the topic paper. It's on the wiki. I think it's an excellent topic paper. He's the coach at St. Andrews in Mississippi. He went through it. He defended it. It's got lots of really good evidence on the topic paper. One of the problems, though, is that the topic paper, which you voted for, isn't all that similar to the resolution. The topic paper includes several pages that are like, we should learn all we can about Brazil. It's the biggest growing economy in the world. We need to learn tons about Brazil. Oh, they excluded Brazil for some reason. I'm not sure. We're just down to those three. And the most important thing is like why and what are the core ultimate questions of this particular resolution? Why are we debating about this? What are we going to answer? What do we hope to ask one another? That sort of stuff. So let's talk about that. The first and most important question is pretty basic. You should ask yourself, should the United States engage more in these countries or simply leave them alone? Leave them alone is a loaded question because these countries are not being left alone. They obviously are trading with other countries. Cuba, for example, and I'll talk about this later. Does anyone know who Cuba's #1 trading partner in the world is?
Russia.
The Netherlands. Love trading with the Netherlands. So they are not being left alone. They are developing, they are growing as countries, they are trading tons of stuff. And so ultimately when you're affirmative, you're basically arguing that we should engage more. The U.S. model is good. We should be more involved in the direction these countries take. Why is a country that is 50 miles south of Miami #1 trading partner in the Netherlands and not here? And when you're negative, you're going to say any of the following things that basically can be summed up as we should not engage. The second question is Latin America important? Economically or politically? Economically, I actually think that's a no-brainer. Mexico is our 3rd largest trading partner. We are Mexico's largest trading partner. Politically, do we care? President after president, basically from JFK to Obama, really have not paid all that much attention to Latin America. It's just kind of our neighborhood, and we've ignored it. We've gone outside of our neighborhood. The Brookings Institute in 2010 did a study on why we should start caring about Latin America, what's important about it. It's a giant section on 3 things. First, economics, trade, the growth. The closer people are that want to buy the stuff we make, the more money we'll make. The closer people are making cool things that we want to buy, the easier it'll be for us to be awesome consumers. They concluded, yes, it is. Politically, not as much. While Brazil is growing, Mexico, we already trade with them a ridiculous amount. Cuba, we haven't traded with them since the 30s, really. And Venezuela hates us. That's the core question. Can you win? Do they matter politically? And the third, and probably my favorite question of the resolution, is enough with Cuba? We've had the exact same policy since the 60s. And that policy is no go to Cuba. A fourth question is, unlike Cuba, where we haven't done anything, Mexico, I think, asked the question of, aren't we already doing tons and tons and tons of stuff with Mexico? And Venezuela recently lost their El Presidente, Hugo Chavez, who was re-elected on the platform of America should die. He started a chant of anti-Americanism, thought that it was very valuable, thought that it was the best way to rally nationalism and be pro-Venezuela. Every problem that went wrong under his administration was the Bush administration's fault. Oh yeah, he said that the United States gave him cancer. He's on the record, and I believe the quote's something along the lines of, if a country is capable of sending missiles across the country to hit within a millimeter, do we really think they haven't invented a cancer weapon yet? You know, something like that. I mean, on his deathbed, like, America is responsible for all of these problems, and it was a very popular chant. Well, he's gone. There's a new leader. There's new sets of leaders that I'll talk about, and I think those are sort of the 5 fundamental core questions about, like, this resolution that we're going to ask. So, section 2, economic engagement. What is it and why do I care? Economic engagement is defined in this Collar and Kastner article. It's about how we can use engagement better. It is about Asia, but it's a pretty good article because in the beginning of it, it's like, well, here's what economic engagement is. And they say it is deliberately expanding economic ties, the goal of changing behavior and improving relations. So it is using the economy and ties to improve the behavior of a particular country. The card. Economic engagement, a policy of deliberately expanding economic ties with an adversary in order to change the behavior of the target state and, in fact, an improvement in bilateral political relations. I include this bottom part because I think it's pretty interesting. No database cataloging instances of positive economic statecraft exists. Beginning with the classic work of Hirschman in 1945, most studies in this regard have focused on policies adopted by great powers only. There are lots of catalogs of things called sanctions and embargoes and tariff penalties and import taxes. And these things are all of the ways we don't engage. Very rarely has anyone academically sat down and said, here are all of the ways that we can engage economically. Instead, it's this very big, broad category. So when it says economically engage, what it's really saying is use our economy to improve our relations with one of these countries. So it's intentionally very broad. So what I imagine happened is they were sitting around discussing whether to include Brazil in this topic or not, and someone said, well, wait a minute, if it's the economic engagement topic and we start throwing all of these countries in. So, for example, the original suggested resolution was, should do that with the entirety of Latin or South America. That topic would have been unwieldy. Engagement is explicitly a positive inducement. Distinguish it from being too broad and confusing. This is Professor Haas and one of his students, O'Sullivan, in a very popular survival article back in 2000. And he says, until very recently, the U.S. has tenaciously clung to the position that policies of economic and political isolation are the right course. There was a philosophy that believed that, hey, Cuba is really bad. They commit tons of human rights abuses. They're just kind of evil. How should we fix that? What do you think the solution was that proposed since the 40s? Close them off. No engagement whatsoever. If we make them really poor and we make them really need stuff, then they're going to be forced to change and turn towards us. That has been the model for decades. Continue reading. Because of the prominence of punitive policies, this debate draws upon many of the lessons extracted from past cases. However, strategies of engagement have thus far been subject to much less stringent evaluation. He's writing this argument in 2000 saying that while we've talked about being mean to someone to get them to change, there's been very little discussion about all of the ways the opposite is good. If you want someone to change their behavior, don't punish them, but reward them, engage them, improve them. I'm going to read a card later about democracy that is overly conclusive that the best way to get someone to act the way you act is to give them some cash. The term engagement was popularized in the early 1980s. The term itself remains a source of confusion. To be a meaningful subject of analysis, and this is a good debate card, because it means if we wanted to be meaningful, the term engagement must refer to something more than a specific than a policy of non-isolation. Engagement refers to a foreign policy strategy which depends on positive incentives to achieve its objectives. It does not preclude the simultaneous use of other instruments, such as sanctions or military force, yet the distinguishing feature of engagement is their reliance on the extension or prevention of incentives to shape behavior. Doing something positive for another country to positively shape their behavior is the defining characteristic of engagement. So, when it comes to Cuba, you need to do something positive for their economy that would improve their behavior. For Mexico, you need to do more things economically to improve their behavior. I will say Mexico is an interesting one because this is definitely using the language of an adversary. You use engagement to change someone who is your enemy into your friend. Is Mexico our enemy? No. No, good Lord, no. Mexico. I'm going to read a few more cards and I'm going to be done. It's going to be card light at the end. Economic engagement includes credits, investments, access to tech, loans, or aid. It includes removing embargoes or tariffs. It is distinct or different from politically engaging, militarily engaging, and civil society engagement. The first card is pretty similar to the tag. My little outline of it, it just lists those things. Again, this is from Haas. But the thing I like about this one is when trying to figure, like, am I economically engaging or not, this one says, well, political engagement can include diplomatic recognition, access to institutions, the scheduling of summits. So if you were thinking about, you know what, I've got a great idea for an affirmative. I want to set up a summit with Cuba. Well, this piece of evidence suggests that that summit is probably political engagement, not economic engagement. Military engagement. Let's say you want to go train their military to get better at doing things for human rights. That's probably military engagement. That's not using the economy. And then finally, civil society engagement, which involves building people-to-people contacts, funding their NGOs. I'll go ahead and do this now. The word remittances. Everyone see that? What is a remittance? Anybody know? Yes? Money sent back to someone in another country. So if you are a Mexican national living in the United States, and you have a job, and you make $1,000, you live on $200, and every month you send $800 back to Mexico to support your family, you are sending an $800 remittance. That's the word that's used for that, a remittance back to the country. Facilitating the flow of remittances, which is something Obama just recently did, is not considered economic engagement, it's considered civil society engagement. So I'm going to break down each of the parts of that, because some of those I didn't know what they were, and I want you to sort of have a grasp on like what do each of these concepts mean, that way they're less confusing. Export credits. So economic engagement can include export credits. In other words, loans, insurance, and other support for exporters to a country. The OECD, which is the International Organization for Development, defines export credits as governments providing officially supported credits through ECAs, or export credit agencies, groups that in support of national exporters competing for sales overseas. Such support can take the form either of official financing support, such as credits to buyers, refinancing, or interest rate support, or pure cover support, such as export. Well, that's really confusing. What that means is, if you want to spend money into Mexico or Cuba, this is giving you a credit. in the form of a really good interest rate, in the form of some insurance, in the form of just a loan of cash that you have to pay back. Basically, it's me saying, hey, I really want you to go invest in Cuba. And you look at me and you say, that's crazy. Why am I going to spend money in Cuba? I say, I tell you what, I will insure your investment. If you spend $1 million there and you lose it, I will write you a check for $1 million. That's a really good insurance policy. I would do that to incentivize people and groups developing and spending money in the country. Investment insurance. This is another one. This is a popular one. These are programs for providing financial cover to companies deciding to invest in a foreign country. Basically, you say, I want to go invest some money in Venezuela, but I'm a little afraid to do so. My biggest concern is that there's some violence in the region that I want to. In order to more economically engage, the government may provide you with what's called investment insurance, which is actually just a form of credit. Minimizes your risk. You can go spend some money. I'm going to give you a good insurance rate. Governments do these sorts of things all of the time. They give great subsidies for investing in war-torn areas, in areas of New Jersey now, post the storm, and certainly in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina, the government offered investment insurance. So if you go in there and build some stuff, they're going to give you coverage. Make sure you don't lose too much money.
What's the difference between that and...
The first is a larger category, for which I stupidly gave that as an example. Investment credit could be something like a loan for something, or giving you a good interest rate for a bunch of money as long as you're going to spend there. Investment insurance is just insurance. That would probably be a form of credit, but so insurance is saying if you lose money, we'll cover your back. The other forms are just giving you a bunch of money, either straight out or as a loan that you would spend in another country. Economic aid. That was another one that was listed. This includes just about anything. It's giving them help with their economy. It is a giant category. We give a ton of economic aid. Does anybody know the two countries we give the most aid to in 2012? Yes?
Pakistan and... no.
You wish. You Indian?
Israel.
Yes.
Okay, you're just afraid we're funding those Pakis. Israel's number 1, and then Egypt is number 2. Pakistan does get some money, but it doesn't make the top 5. But economic aid can be just about anything, which means it's a very big category. If you are looking for a chart, you can look at for the Vaughn's chart, V-A-U-G-H-N-S. I'm not going to click on it right now because I'm very slow and I'm not going to get through all of this lecture. But it's a list of every country we've given and how much foreign aid we have given them. It also includes a list of all the types of economic aid. Anything we've done for another country that is on this chart of economic foreign aid probably is topical. In other words, you could probably do that with one of these countries if you found an advocate who said, hey, we should totally, this thing we did for Pakistan, we should totally do for Mexico. Yeah, I just want to make this very clear. You can basically just do about anything. As far as I'm concerned, the topic is resolved. Interact with this country and their economy. Do something. And finally, we give a ton of economic aid right now. But there's not a whole bunch of Latin American countries on that. Remember at the beginning I said we just haven't engaged them? The last economic aid that was given between the United States and Mexico was a huge check that the government of Mexico wrote for the United States to help some rebuilding efforts after Superstorm Sandy. That's right. Mexico wrote us a check to help us with the disaster relief. The Mexican government agencies were also active at writing checks and helping out post-Katrina in the New Orleans area. So, ton of money to Israel, we get very little back. We do give some economic aid to Mexico, they give a ton to us. Do we give any economic aid to Cuba? No. Well, I'll get to that. Do we give any to Venezuela? No, not economic aid. We certainly engage them, but we don't give them aid. Examples of things the U.S. is doing via economic engagement. This is a card Nick Miller found. It's the Office of the Coordinator of Counterterrorism. It included a list of all of the ways we are engaging. The U.S. strategy of total economic engagement pursues economic reform, rule of law, and global economic integration. It can include regular bilateral discussions on topics with host government officials. So just talking to them about their economy. 2, formal structural dialogues. So having a meeting at the UN or having a meeting at the WTO or just sitting down and having a very formal conversation. That's economic engagement. U.S. bilateral and what's bilateral, what's multilateral? Bilateral is us talking to Cuba. Multilateral is everybody in the United Nations talking about us and Cuba. Assistant programs for economic reform, and there's a huge list of them. Programs are often complemented with technical assistance provided by specialized U.S. agencies and offices. Next one, coordinated multilateral policies and assistance strategies to advance reform goals by working with international organizations. So calling up one of these international organizations and saying, hey, IMF, World Bank, will you all help out Venezuela? That would be economic engagement according to this. And then finally, working with NGOs or non-governmental organizations on the ground to advance reform issues.
Okay, what are NGOs?
Non-governmental organizations. You actually only really ever see the phrase NGO, and it just means any sort of private group that's working on the ground somewhere to accomplish something. Well, why would I include this chart for you to read? I mean, it's boring. It's why is it a valuable sort of to know it's out there? These are possible affirmatives. It is a giant category of stuff. There are people who say some of these things aren't economic engagement, but here are definitely some people who say that this is total economic engagement. Removal of penalties. This is when I went through my cartoon phase and started finding stuff. Domestic penalties for not buying American. There are a certain set of Republicans in the House in particular that love to throw the Buy America clause onto all economic aid. And that clause says, before you buy this stuff, you have to make sure that you can't find a similar product in America that you have to buy first, and then there's a penalty if you don't. The Buy America clause does not apply to Mexico or Canada because for most products we have a free trade agreement with them. Which means that, well, a Buy America applies and there is a penalty unless you're buying it from Mexico, and then because we have a free trade agreement with them as members of the WTO as well, we're supposed to be able to allow them to buy it. Removing those penalties would be an example. Another is we have an embargo on Cuba that I'm going to talk about on length. There are tons of books, all sorts of journal articles, basically with some minor modifications, no trade with Cuba whatsoever. That would be an example of a penalty. Helms-Burton, Helms hyphen Burton. It's named after the two senators who helped write it. The government can sue your company if you are investing or helping someone invest in Cuba. That's a penalty. Third, we have tariffs for products and other acts of protectionism. Can someone tell me what either tariffs or protectionism is? Yes, ma'am.
A tariff is a tax that you get by importing goods.
Absolutely. A tax on importing a particular good from a particular place or a country, something like that. And other acts of protectionism. Protectionism is just a word that refers to protecting your economy against other people's economies and making sure that, you know, trade, it's from a group that doesn't think trade is all that good. Here's that card that I read, because we've sort of been going through that, also enlisted a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to go through those quickly so you kind of know what economic engagement is. You have investment promotion. That's where a company, NGO, or a law that promotes investment. This literally refers to things like ad campaigns, enticing companies to invest. We've got access to technology is listed. The Bush administration in 2008 worked to get agriculture protected, even from sales to Cuba. What that means is that even though we still can't trade with Cuba, we can sell them food and medicine now. Those were access to particular technologies. Economic loans. Here's some cash. Pay us back with interest later. There's a lot of foreign debt. Those are countries that owe us money. And the more popular version you've heard of that is that, like, oh man, China owes so much debt. The U.S. debt is huge. Well, part of that is there are a bunch of countries out there that owe us a ton of money as well, that have huge amounts of foreign debt. They don't just owe us money either. A lot of them owe money to, the World Bank and the IMF, stuff like that, giving them loans as a form. And finally, it listed facilitated entry into an international financial organization. You will see the phrase WTO a lot. You will also see the phrase GATT, G-A-T-T. GATT is the old phrase. It sort of basically changed its structure and its name a little bit. That's the World Trade Organization. Think of it as the United Nations for trade. Except it has a little court where you can sue each other if you think someone's being, overly protectionist and stuff like that. Maybe if we tried to help facilitate Cuba's entry into the WTO, that might be considered a form of economic engagement. So, now that we know what economic engagement is, I'm going to take a little bit to talk to you about all of the advantages to engaging. If you have questions about any of these, feel free to jump in and ask. I liked this image. It was the eagle just sort of ripping into Latin America.
That's a big advantage.
Got to make I don't know why we're puncturing the ocean either. It's kind of a overly graphic part. We can't be sitting there. And if we were to poop, it would be on China. Okay. U.S. legitimacy, our image. This is a big category of advantages. They're going to be on this topic. The phrase soft power is something that you should know. I'm going to read a card on it a little bit. It's popularized, if not invented, by a professor at Harvard by the name of Joseph Nye, N-Y-E. It's actually Bill Nye, the science guy's brother.
Really?
I made that up.
Yeah.
Soft power is the opposite of hard power. Hard power references our military, our strength. If I want Jason to do something, and I decide that hard power is the best way to go about it, I threaten to beat him up. If he doesn't do it, I go through with it and just put a whooping on him. That's hard power. Soft power references our ability my ability to persuade and convince Jason to do things without having to threaten him. It references my likability. What interest does he have in doing what I've asked him to do? Soft power can come in many forms. There's another phrase that I like a lot called sticky power. Sticky power. It's invented by the greatest evidence writer of all time, Walter Russell Mead, M-E-A-D. Mead popularized it and said it's sort of a category of soft power. It's when people are dependent on you and so they're kind of stuck to you. And his example was Mexico. Mexico will do what we ask Mexico to do with very few exceptions. Why? They're so dependent on us, and you all said sort of different versions of that. I mean, we are their number one trading partner. They're barely our top number 3. Mexico disagrees with us, but I think if we made a few phone calls, they would listen. Venezuela, who's further around, doesn't have the benefit of sticky power. In many ways, economic engagement is a way of increasing our sticky power, making them more dependent on us. So soft power is important. Being nice to countries, engaging, helps make us more credible, improves our image. Second, we're losing the hemisphere to others. A lot of people like to talk. I'm going to give you some authors in a little bit who love to say it. But basically, Iran made very good friends with Chavez before his death. China is getting very buddy-buddy with Mexico, very buddy-buddy with Brazil. Basically, these people who are in our backyard and we've always sort of taken for granted have suddenly started to make other friends. Losing the hemisphere is important because the problem with the Roman Empire is they had a lot of borders to protect. The United States has 2 major land borders. Are the Canadians going to invade?
No.
Both of them.
Can't trust
I think we can take the Mounties. I mean, you may not trust the Canadians. Any Canadian? No, I'm just kidding. What about Mexico? They going to invade? No, they're not. Does China have a historical neighbor that they fought with? Oh, that's right, all of them. Does Russia have any neighbors that they fought with? Oh, that's right, all of them. What about Europe? Have those people always gotten along? Where's the lady with the I Love Germany shirt? Yeah, exactly. We live in a neighborhood that, let's be honest, the property value is pretty high. Not a whole lot of neighbors fighting neighbors. Well, we're beginning to lose that. We're beginning to lose a little bit of our legitimacy, our image in the neighborhood. Third, I mentioned this already, anti-Americanism is beginning to win elections in places like Bolivia and Venezuela and Brazil and almost all of these populated, even democratic countries. There's at least one party whose major focus is down with America. Ignore America. Our image is hurting. In addition to losing the hemisphere, sort of the message that they bring is that we just don't care about our neighbors. It ranges from Chavez's like, oh, did you stump your toe today? Probably America's fault. To the Bolivian message, and we won't talk about it, which is just simply like, what has the United States done for you? There's also something often referred to called the North-South gap in the economic or developments literature. That is that a majority of the wealth is located in the northern parts of the hemisphere, and most of the poverty is associated in the southern parts of the hemisphere. You can sort of draw a line, and if you live north of it, you're probably a rich country, and if you live south of it, you're probably a poor country. And so what's the problem there? And a lot of people blame the economic image that the United States has portrayed and the way we do it. Just so happens that a lot of Latin America, we start getting south. And so you'll see the phrase a lot, north-south gap. And finally, why is image or legitimacy important? Well, I think soft power helps us do the things we want to do. And it's important to remember that. And that can take many forms. Anything good we want to do is probably a lot easier if everyone in our neighborhood likes us. And, America. Good. Hegemony, good. I mean, it's a debate topic. It's a foreign policy debate topic. People are going to talk about why it's important for the United States to be strong and powerful and have an awesome military with the ability to just kick people's butts. And, there haven't been any world wars since the world wars. Why? America. Here's a piece of evidence that I promised that talks about soft power, sort of in the category of Latin America. It's longer. I'm just going to read some parts from Perez 10. It's actually in an article about Cuba. This is the section where it's like soft power. Traditionally, the U.S. has projected its influence by using various combinations of hard and soft power. It has been a long time since the U.S. last sponsored or supported military action in Latin America. It is very likely, well, not according to Chavez. We've been trying to assassinate leaders for decades. Anyway, it is very likely that Latin American citizens and their governments would view any overt display of American hard power in the region negatively. Unlike me and Jason, where I could just, beat him up and he would have to do what I'd say, it would be very awkward, if not difficult, if we just invaded Paraguay and we're like, do this, Probably wouldn't help our image very much. One can only imagine the fodder an American military excursion into Latin America would provide for Chavez or Morales. Soft power can win over people and governments without resorting to coercion, but is limited by other factors. The key to soft power is an enduring sense of legitimacy. that can be projected across the globe to advance policies. The key to this legitimacy is a good image and reputation as a responsible actor. A good reputation image go a long way towards goodwill, help the U.S., unpopular ideas and reforms. The U.S. must repair its image by going on a diplomatic offensive, reminding Latin American people of the important relationship. Basically, 2010, this article's written says, we need to improve our image in our neighbors. We want to do a lot of things. We're not doing it. It'd be a great way for us to start. Big part of the debate topic. Let me quickly go through U.S.-Latin American relations. I think that is separate. Remember I said that Brookings Institute did a big study on why we need to have good relations with Latin America. I think a lot of this topic, including the affirmative that we have in the starter pack, is going to talk about why we need better relations with Latin America. It's very much related and tied to everything that I just told you about image. Second, it is important to be unchallenged by our neighbors. These authors, Brooks and Woolforth, both professors of government at Dartmouth, wrote a very large section of their article that says that the United States has had the longest run of unipolarity. And it has a ton to do with the fact that in our neighborhood, we have never had to militarize our border. It separates us from the Romans. It separates us from the Ottomans. It separates us from the Soviet Union. It has separated us throughout history. Every great power has died via 1,000 cuts to their borders through their neighbors. The United States has two very good neighbors, and our hemisphere in general is very positive. The environment. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but basically there's a phrase, it's like ultra diverse or ultra biodiversity, which is the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, designates areas. Basically, Latin America is the most diverse set of places in the world. You know, you got the Amazon there, you've got lots of desert and stuff that we want to protect. Our relations with them are important for us maintaining the environment. A lot of environmentalists call for it. Economic security is also important. I've talked about growth, being friends with our neighbors. We want to be able to sell goods to the Mexicans. We want the Cubans to, not explode at any point. We like Venezuela. We interact with them a lot. Energy access. Depending on who you ask, we invaded Iraq just to get some oil. Turns out that they found a lot of it in Cuba. A lot of it. And they recently, I think 2007, they did another look through Venezuela and they were like, oh wow, remember how we said there were 90 billion barrels here? Turned out we meant 200 billion. My bad. Just tons of oil in these places and in these countries. And if they think we're the bad guy, they're probably not going to give us access to that oil. And finally, proliferation. Oh yeah, I put up this cartoon too. Isn't that cool?
Wait, does Brazil have a mushroom?
What's the really tiny one in the front? Like in the back. It's
Oh,
kind of
I
tiny.
see.
I apologize for the quality of the cartoon. I'll draw it better next time. There are people who are legitimately concerned about Brazil's move towards getting a nuclear weapon. One of the reasons they would do that is because they can't trust the big guy who lives north. 3, economic growth would be a reason to engage. Sort of listing some of the examples. Well, we need trading partners. The two things we're most concerned with are import growth and export growth. Import growth means that we are importing more things. That is growing. That's one way to grow our economy, is by being able to buy goods as cheaply as possible. The more that's being manufactured in countries that are close, like Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, etc., helps improve our economy. And also export growth, which is the opposite, which means that if you build something here, you need to sell it. If you are making cell phones here in the United States and designing them, do you think it helps you out if everyone in Mexico is rich? A ton. If everyone in Mexico is below the poverty line, they're not exactly buying the new Samsung Galaxy 4 and then trading that in for their iPod and iPhones. You want export growth to be good. The United States, when we do manufacture things, we manufacture very expensive things. Agriculture. We actually sell a lot of it. lot of corn, lot of stuff that we grow, we sell. We sell it to Latin America. It makes it a lot easier. It doesn't have to be shipped across an ocean. It's the closest place to get stuff. We also buy a ton of vegetables and fruit, but in addition to that, we mean like cotton, all sorts of stuff. Manufacturing bases. Does anyone know the #1 employer in the state of Mexico that's not the Mexican government? So the #1 private employer in the country of Mexico. What? No, what company?
I know that McDonald's has like
Walmart. Walmart, and it's not even close. They do a ton of manufacturing in Mexico. They also have a bunch of Walmarts in Mexico. It's like Mexican government employees, like if I was doing a pie chart, and I actually looked for a pie chart that did it, it's like Mexican government, Walmart, everyone else. It's ridiculous. Finally, energy security is incredibly important. The United States has a vested interest in having access to oil, even though we have been drilling and finding a lot more oil in the United States. The fact that they found a bunch in Venezuela, found a bunch in Cuba, it makes our economy a lot more secure if we know where the oil that we use comes from. And finally, the economic growth that is tied to immigration and emigration. Remittances, but also jobs. People coming here for good jobs, us being able to send places, sort of tied to immigration. I don't think I made this another category. Tourism. It's like Mexico's second biggest industry. It's Cuba's biggest industry. There's a bunch of studies that say that if it became legal to travel to Cuba, something like 1 in 12 Americans would attempt to travel there next year. It's like, wow, we've never been to Cuba because we've never been legally allowed to go to Cuba. We can go to Cuba now. Let's go to Cuba. Sounds great. Christmas in Cuba. Trade. Trade is another advantage. This is the old image right there from the NAFTA trade negotiations. And, it's Uncle Sam and then a Mountie and then like stereotype of a Mexican person, I guess. And all three are pretty offensive. And you'll notice you've got the cars and the industries and the big towers and the computers, and it's them holding it up above the world. NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. I'll talk about it later, but basically we do a ton of trade with these countries, in particular Mexico and Canada. Canada's #1, Mexico's #3. They are beginning to trade with other people. I've mentioned China. There have also been moves towards something called the bilateral free trade agreements. Bilateral free trade agreements are us negotiating with another country that says that, hey, we'll get rid of tariffs, you get rid of tariffs, let's just treat it like there's no border here when it comes to our economic stuff. We've been negotiating those with a lot of countries. Europe has been negotiating via the EU with a lot of these countries. They're basically trying to steal our markets from us. And China, in particular, who is growing, and I have a chart later about how much China's been growing, they also are trying to have free trade agreements, even though they're a communist country, with all of these countries in Latin America where they want to sell them their goods, they want to buy their goods, and they want to negotiate. Something that you may hear a lot about is the FTAA. It stands for the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas. It was an attempt to, instead of a bilateral, basically everyone get together and let's just sort of do a NAFTA for all of America. All of them should get together and we should trade stuff, properly.
What does it stand for again?
Free Trade Agreement of America.
The free trade area of the Americas.
Free Trade Area of the Americas. Yes, thank you, Will. Free Trade Area of the Americas. That's why it didn't sound right. But it was just like, hey, this is like a big free trade zone. It broke down. There are people who still talk about doing it a lot. There are some people who are like, we should do it, but we should exclude America. There are other people that are like, we should do a similar version, but just for South America. So lots of people talking about it. Protectionism is a debate impact. Define it as tariffs or other means of not trading. A lot of people just defend that free trade itself is good. Because as you become dependent on other countries and gain some sticky power, you're less likely to go to war and conflict with them. And also the WTO. A lot of the things we can do, facilitating entry for Cuba, helping solve some disputes with Venezuela via trade, can be a good advantage to economically engaging some of these countries and maybe not doing some of the mean things that we're being, honestly hammered for. Next advantage, China. I've said it a lot. The Chinese are expanding. They're coming into our backyard. This is a Lovelace card. It was actually about Argentina, but this is the forward. And in the forward, it pretty solidly makes this argument that the U.S. government is waking up to China's growing presence in Latin America. China has pursued a policy of economic engagement. Chinese investment in the region is picking up. Advances in information technology and China's growing capacity and interest in information warfare make the U.S. particularly vulnerable. Cause for the government to react to this current trend by increasing its engagement in regional strategic industries and bettering relations with its southern neighbors. So this is a book about how we need more economic engagement. Why? Yeah, China's there. They're developing industries, they're trading, and there are a lot of people who say that this is a bad, bad thing. Here's a couple of reasons why. This is a chart which is the expected growth of e-commerce consumer base. So, buying things electronically over the next little bit. Right now, there's about 114 million online dollars spent. That was 2010. This is the expected 2015 amounts. If China starts buying all of that from Mexico because of all of the manufacturing that exists there, Mexico no longer has the United States as their number one trading partner. Who quickly becomes their trading partner? China. It is a giant country with a ton of people that is growing and getting bigger, and depending on who you ask, they're obviously trying to invade us and kill us all. Okay. Don't want the Chinese messing with our neighborhood. A lot of these people, it's just out of fear. A lot of the Chinese say, what are you talking about? You've been selling weapons to Taiwan for the past 5 decades. We want to sell cell phones to Mexico and you're freaking out?
Taiwan's not relevant.
I read a really good article by a crazy person who's like, I'm former CIA, and here's my evidence that China is staging an invasion of the United States in Cuba and Mexico right now. Well, there are crazy people out there. Sometimes these crazy, like Jason, sometimes these crazy people get read in debate. Also, economic competition. There's a lot of people who aren't as crazy that just say that there's a finite amount of stuff that can be bought in the world, and ultimately they're either going to buy Chinese goods or American goods. We want them buying American goods, not Chinese goods. Latin America's the one area where we can't lose because we don't have to ship it and stuff like that. And obviously we're doing a poor job each and every time that a Mexican farmer buys a Chinese good as opposed to the American good. I mean, it's right here, it's much easier. That competition can be bad, etc. Energy security issues, I've already said, now we'll continue to say, there's lots of oil in a lot of these countries. China is growing, it's getting bigger, it needs oil. We don't want them competing for oil. A lot of people say it's the most likely place. Julia could probably tell you all of the reasons why we're likely to fight with China over oil, when a much better model would be to be cooperative about it. Economic engagement is competitive. And then, there's just all these neocon fears. These are the neoconservatives, the staunch military people who are just kind of afraid of the Chinese, who make arguments that basically boil down to China's attempting to invade us and make us look bad and steal our thunder and stuff like that. We've got to keep them out. Basically, they still sort of think that 1950s Cuba is a possibility, or 1960s Cuba is a possibility, and we need to, they're just trying to store their missiles on Cuba because they're going to invade us at any second. And when most evidence suggests that, that's couldn't be further from the truth. My favorite area for an advantage, and a reason we should probably engage, I forget what number I'm on, is democracy. It was the college topic 2 years ago. I love reading about democracy. Basically, the United States wants everyone to be a democracy. We think it's great. We love telling other people how they should run their governments. The problem is that our message lacks much credibility because we haven't engaged, haven't convinced people that they need to do things. In all of the democracy literature, there's a discussion of the phrase called beacons. I don't know why they use beacons. A few people call them like lighthouses of democracy. But basically, you just need like the shining democracy on the hill, and then all of the countries near it will see it and be like, haha, we should become a democracy as well. And so one of the problems is Mexico sort of like modeled their democracy after the United States, and it's very close. And so when Mexico's not doing well, it's a poor beacon. It doesn't look like Mexico is a good example of democracy. Venezuela is the exact opposite. You know, it's been very anti-American. It's risen up and grown more powerful, made lots of friends based on that anti-Americanism. And so basically, the less engaged we are, the less our image of like what democracy is valuable. And then economic engagement is just pro-democracy. This is from Brandon Amash in 2012. Empirical, what's that phrase mean?
Money.
Historical, based on the empiricism. Empiricism are things that you've experienced through your history. So empirically proven. So empirical evidence shows that a strong economy is correlated to democracy. This correlation is a causal link. Economic growth directly leads to democratization. Lifting sanctions and working together, state will allow their economy to grow, increasing the likelihood of democracy, and thus promoting greater freedom of expression, opinions, and dissent.
What about China?
What about China?
It's not democracy.
Well, what about it?
But it's growing faster than we are.
No, it's not. You have to be a democracy to grow. It's that as the economy grows, democratic ideals become more powerful.
I still think your point is still, if China's economy is growing, then why is China not a democracy?
They are slowly becoming a democracy. The democratic people say that China is quickly becoming democratic in a lot of ways. They're not running over Chinese people in Tiananmen Square anymore. Right now.
You're right. They're just locking them in worker concentration camps where they have nets out the windows to prevent people from committing
I will
suicide.
lock you up. Energy and the environment. I've already used the phrase ultra diverse. Latin America's that. A lot of people are going to talk about this sort of the environment. The United States needs to basically send the message that we should do things environmentally friendly. There's oil. There's my picture of oil. Lots of oil, lots of places. We need oil. We need security. We need to not fight wars. Or we're willing to fight wars to protect oil. And then NAFTA, so when it was being written in '94 and being agreed upon, there were protests about the environment because people were afraid that there would be free trade, and then basically we would just like, businesses would run to the places where there was the least amount of environmental protection. So basically like, oh, there's this state in Mexico that lets us build these iPads, but we don't have to do anything with the toxic chemicals. We can just like dump them in the river. So let's go there because that'd be really cheap. Most of those fears have been largely unfounded, that companies aren't that irresponsible. But there's a lot of stuff about economic engagement that's just sort of like NAFTA, manufacturing concerns. The more that a country grows, the worse it is for the environment. But in many ways, the opposite is also an argument that people make, that as people get economic wealth, they're more likely to do environmentally friendly things, that the richer counties in this country are the ones most likely to have good environmental records, and the rich counties and states are the most likely to have environmental protections. And so there's a good debate about the ways that economic engagement is good or bad for the environment. Finally, I just want to briefly talk about indigenous populations for two reasons. First, it's a huge section of the topic paper for, in particular, Mexico. And when I go through the countries, I'm going to talk about that. It's just, there's a section dedicated to minority group populations that exist in these countries. Depending on the amount of time I'll be able to spend at the end of this lecture on sort of like the history of each country. But Cuba, Venezuela, and Mexico all have long, strong histories of minority groups and populations that have existed that are either in poverty or many of them are rebelling against the central government. And if you're interested in that, I think this topic is a great area for you to discuss and research the ways that we could economically engage to help out particular groups. It was one of the most enjoyable parts of the topic for me because I'll be honest, I'm just sort of like a historical idiot when it comes to like population groups and stuff like that. And so I did think that was interesting. And second, each of them does have a very diverse history. Groups that are currently struggling for or previously struggled for independence, like the Zapatista movement in Mexico. There are minority groups in Cuba that have been protesting the Cuban government for a long, long time. Miami, Florida is very well known for having a very anti-Castro population of Cuban Americans that are dissidents that to this day, are demanding their land back from the government of Cuba. And Venezuela is full of them as well that I just can't remember off the top of my head, but have written down in all sorts of areas down there. So indigenous populations are certainly there, certainly lots of literature about engaging them and helping them out. I have two large sections left. I have sort of like disadvantages to engaging, and then I have the countries. But I kind of feel like I'm losing steam, so let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break, and when we get back I'll do section 2. So get up, stretch, use the restroom, that sort of stuff.